Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat. I'm one of these perpetually uncertain people, and welcome. I do want to do a bit of housekeeping before we get started. As always, I offer one-to-one chat sessions for anybody who wants to talk about topics like these in more detail. Again, I'm not a therapist or anything like that. I'm just somebody who has a certain perspective on the world, and it seems to resonate with a lot of people. So if you're interested and you'd like to book with me, you can do that on my website. All the links will be in the show notes below. And also I have a newsletter that I've been updating regularly, weekly for like the past month or so, where I explore the lessons I'm currently learning. Every week I feel like I learn something new or I'm working through something new, and I explore it in this newsletter. So if you're interested in reading about those, you can sign up for that on my website as well. So for today's podcast episode, this is a topic that I think is really important. It's also something I have also written about in a newsletter as well. But it's about how your assumptions are hurting your own feelings. And what I mean by that is so many of us go into circumstances or situations, from our own perspective, as you do, which is very normal. You go into it from the way you see the world, how you expect people to act based on how you act. We have ourselves to work from, right? We're thinking from our perspective and our mindset, which is normal, obviously. But a lot of the time when we go into circumstances like that, we often forget that there's a lot of information that we don't have yet. We're missing a lot of data. We only see and can perceive what is shown to us, right? And so in circumstances where you're getting half the story or just like a little sliver of the story, you would probably make assumptions to fill in the blanks of the things that you don't get, like you haven't seen yet. And oftentimes those assumptions will come from what your inner narrative, what your inner beliefs are about yourself. And a lot of the time, for many of us, at least the people who resonate with my content, those beliefs and those narratives are negative ones. They're ones where we feel like we are not good enough, that the world's out to get us, that people don't like us, that they're doing things against us, that it's very personal. And so the way you're perceiving this scenario, the assumptions you're making are hurting your own feelings. You're hurting your own feelings by assuming certain things that you cannot know for sure are true, because they're coming from the mindset of, I'm bad, I'm unworthy, nobody wants me, or people hate me, or I don't deserve anything good. Those are the assumptions you're making. And so in the newsletter I wrote last week or 2 weeks ago about how you just don't have enough data yet. My point was that even though it might seem at times that you know exactly what's going on, you can see everything. And I fall into this trap as well, because I think I'm pretty self-aware and I'm very analytical, sometimes too analytical. I overthink a lot. I try to see things from every angle. That's kind of a wound for me, where I feel like I need to be hyper aware of everything so that I know, as a people pleaser, fearful avoidant, I have to know how people are feeling all the time to avoid any fighting or aggression or, anything that makes me feel unsafe. I still have that to an extent, and now I do it in the way where I try to overanalyze everything. Obviously, it's helped me with my work, because the fact that I'm able to overanalyze a lot of things helps me create content that's very specific and that reaches a lot of people. So I love that. However, I also tend to overanalyze situations and how I assume people are thinking in certain situations. And I use myself as a reference point, as we all do. But sometimes I'll go into it thinking, okay, well, they said this with this tone, therefore it must mean this, because if I were to say that in this tone, then it would mean this because of my perception of this and how this interact, and I would kind of try to piece it all together. Like in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, the Pepe Sylvia meme or whatever, where Charlie's trying to solve the mailroom mystery. That's kind of what goes on in my brain when I'm trying to figure out why people are doing the things they do and why they would do that and why they would say this. And then I have to remind myself that I don't have all the data yet, or I might never have all the data. But what I have right now is very limited, because I am not in this person's head. I am not seeing the full picture. And so in circumstances like that, the implication of having assumptions or making decisions based on these assumptions is that you risk hurting your own feelings, and you also risk the connection that you can possibly have with this person. And I think the reason we tend to jump to these conclusions or make these assumptions is because we want to avoid the confrontation, the discomfort of asking for clarity, because it's uncomfortable to do that. It's uncomfortable for someone to say something, for us to try and assume what that person's saying, or to be like, oh, why would they say that? What does it mean? And then to go out and ask them to say, hey, you said this, but I'm not sure what you meant by it. Can you clarify? That's uncomfortable. It feels almost a little bit like, what's the word? Like surgical in a sense. Like it's not surgical. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like businessy. It feels very businessy. Like how you would speak to a coworker trying to figure out something for your project that's going on or something like that, right? We don't want to do that when it comes to relationships or friendships or whatever. It doesn't feel, I don't know, it just doesn't feel emotional or like sensitive or, but truly it actually is a very vulnerable thing to do, and vulnerability is so important in relationships. Because if we don't ask to get clarity, we will never know. And we will always lean into the assumptions that we want to make in order to just get that answer rather than just asking, right? And this ties into avoidance too. Avoidant people will always try to avoid conflict and the discomfort, the possibility of rejection, abandonment, being shamed or guilted. They will try to avoid that. I have avoidant tendencies as well. So like we try to avoid that as much as possible. And so as a way to avoid that, we just try to come up with assumptions of, okay, I'll solve this mystery on my own. I'll answer these questions without getting any other feedback from anybody else. Unfortunately, that's not how human connection works. People are different than you. They operate differently. They think differently. They have different reasons. They have different backgrounds. They have different experiences that lead to how they process things. So if you're trying to assume for them, your assumptions are not coming from the truth. They're coming from your beliefs, your narrative in your head. And if your narrative is, I'm unworthy, then you're going to come up with assumptions that validate the feeling of being unworthy. So if someone said something, they might have meant nothing by it. They might have just meant it straightforward. You, not really maybe understanding their tone or something, might interpret that and assume that they meant it maliciously. And now all of a sudden, your perception of them has changed because of how you perceived that statement. And now you feel the need to not be with them anymore. See, and it affects this connection that you could potentially have, right? So one thing, when I go through this, one thing I ask myself in moments like that is, when I come up with like an assumption that hurts my feelings, my question is this true? And more often than not, you cannot say it's true because you don't have all the information, because you can never have all the information because you're not in that person's head. And also you haven't even asked them, at the bare minimum, you have to ask them. That person might tell you the truth. They might not tell you the truth, and they might not even know what their truth is really. Some people just can't tap into their emotions that well. And so they don't even know how to express what they meant by what they said. But the bare minimum is asking them. And then the next step after that is waiting, getting more information, allowing things to unfold as they need to. But if you don't even ask to at least get an idea of what they meant, then how can you say that that assumption is true? You can't. So now you're operating from a place of, this is for sure what they meant, and they meant it to hurt me, and of course they meant this, and I hate them now. And so you're now spiraling. You've hurt your own feelings. You're spiraling. You don't like them. You don't want to be around them, all because of your own mind, your own beliefs, right? And it's silly when you think of it that way. Like, you are stressing yourself out. Nobody else has stressed you out. Like, okay, yeah, that comment might have been upsetting, but then after you ask yourself, okay, is this true? Is this assumption true? And you can't say it is, because again, you don't have all the data, you don't have all the information. The next question I would ask myself is, okay, so what else could they have meant by it then? If it's not true that it meant this malicious thing, what is an alternative explanation that I could possibly conceptualize? And an alternative explanation might be, they meant it straightforwardly. They meant it as a joke. They meant it, whatever. And now all of a sudden, you don't feel as awful as you did with the last assumption, because both can be equally true, because you don't know. You don't have all the information. Either one can be true, but you're choosing to believe the one that hurts your feelings, to validate those inner beliefs, those narratives, self-limiting wounds, all that stuff, you know? And I love realizing this, because it really changes the perception you have of how much power you have in your life. Because I think we all forget how much power we actually have in our lives. We have so much, because it simply just comes down to our perception of things. Now, of course, there are systems and circumstances that don't allow us to do a lot of stuff in life, totally. And we are subject to their whims. We can't escape certain aspects of life, and when it comes to capitalism or racist systems or, you know, oppression, all that stuff, of course. But ultimately, the only power you have in any circumstance, not even just in that, but in any circumstance, really, is how you choose to perceive it, right? Because that then changes whether or not it's good or bad. Now, of course, some things are inherently like bad because they hurt people. They're meant to hurt people, but your perception can be really whatever you want it to be. You know, if you want to feel happy in this moment, despite what's going on around you, you can choose that. You can. It's not easy, obviously. Like, it's so much easier said than done, of course. And I'm not saying everyone should do that and, you know, never feel bad in your life, never allow yourself to feel bad, only high vibrations. No. Feeling bad is part of the human experience. I would never say to not feel bad. Let yourself wallow. It's important. It's important to do that. Because sometimes without pain, you can't also feel pleasure, right? And also, you don't always have to feel good. It's not necessary, and it's not realistic, and it's not human to always feel good. But what I'm saying is that if you want to, and you're in a situation where all external circumstances are telling you that you shouldn't feel good, but you still want to, you can choose to do that regardless, you know? And that's something that's taken me a really long time to recognize and understand and lean into. And choose to just feel good despite what I think I should be feeling in this given moment. So going back to the idea of assumptions, you know, someone might say something, and the instinct, based on my own wounds, my own beliefs, you know, the inner wounds I have, that, you know, all that kind of stuff. The instinct is to think it's a negative thing. It's negative, right? So you want to feel bad. You're leaning into the feeling of badness because that's what you should lean into, because that, of course, they meant something bad from it. But if you decide, you know what, actually, I don't want to be feeling this feeling of unworthiness. I don't want to be feeling this badness. How can I not feel this? Oh, the way I can not feel this is to A, ask for clarification from this person, or B, or both, you know, or B, decide to look at the meaning of that statement from the opposite perspective. And now all of a sudden I've switched into a good meaning or a neutral meaning. And now I can go back to just feeling fine, you know? And again, it's like, it feels oddly simple. It feels almost like a trick to think that way. Because I think, at least for me, my mind immediately is like, well, it shouldn't be that easy. It shouldn't be that simple. There must be something off there or whatever. But it really is. And I think society convinces us that things should always be hard, that achieving happiness or comfort should be difficult, but I don't think it is. And that's kind of one of the awakenings I've been having, is that it doesn't have to be that difficult. You can choose it. I'm not saying it's easy, again, and I'm not saying there isn't suffering in the world. Of course there is, and there always will be, but there are some moments where you get to just decide, and it's fine if you just decide to feel okay despite someone saying something that could be perceived as negative. And it might be a negative thing. They might have said it maliciously, and yet you can still choose to just brush it off. You can still choose to look at it from a different perspective, you know? I don't know. I feel like that's something that I've been trying to keep in mind. I've been trying to lean into more, because, you know, hurting my own feelings with assumptions doesn't do me any good. It doesn't serve me in any way. The only thing I could think of as a reason for it to serve me or to be good is recognizing the people in your life that shouldn't be there, right? And that's totally fair. Someone says something and you're like, okay, that's a malicious thing. Do I want this person in my life? Maybe they're not, you know, they're not right for me. They're not going to make me feel good. That's totally valid. But if you're perceiving that from every single circumstance, and that's what you're leaning into all the time, and you're not asking for clarification, you're not looking at the other perspective too to get a different point of view, you're just hurting yourself. In a way, it's kind of like a form of self-harm in a sense, right? because you're just kind of allowing yourself to lean into the negative side of things all the time. And yeah, that's something I do that often, and I've been trying really hard to curb that. I've been trying really hard to ask myself, okay, what's the opposite explanation to this? Because let's say it's not malicious, I don't want it to be malicious, I don't want to feel negative or anything like that. How is there an opposite explanation that could make me feel better? And if it is, amazing. Now, I guess that could also sound like leading into delusion, but I don't think that's true, because again, everybody is different. Everybody means different things. Sometimes people say things that don't mean something, or they meant it, but it didn't come off that, there's so much nuance to this discussion. So my goal and my aim with all the content I create is to just help you feel a little better. And for me, this has been a technique to just help me feel better, to avoid leaning into experiences or assumptions that make me feel bad, because why would I want to make myself feel bad? I don't, right? Especially and this goes back into the self-worth work that I've talked about a lot. I don't want myself to feel bad. I want to feel good. I want to prove to myself that I deserve to feel good. And this is a significant way to do that, to stop leaning into negative assumptions that hurt my feelings and to look at it from a different perspective. What's a positive assumption I can have? Or can I ask for clarification? And obviously, the asking for clarification part is harder because it involves you being vulnerable and really stepping into this assertiveness and asking and being like, hey, you said something that made me uncomfortable, or you said something I wasn't clear about what you meant by it. Can you clarify that? It's a little scary. It's intimidating, of course, but that's also an option to get more data so that you can make more aligned decisions. But if we act from a place of, oh, this was for sure a negative assumption, or acting from a place of this assumption is for sure negative, they meant it negatively, now I'm going to do an action after that that's counter reactive to the negative thing. Now all of a sudden you're acting in ways that aren't maybe aligned with you, but you feel like you need to because of the initial belief that this was a negative statement. You know what I mean? Whereas you could just ask to clarify and get a bit more information if possible and act from that, right? An example that comes to mind really is a friend or an ex-friend who was very sensitive, very reactive. I don't want to say sensitive, but reactive, and did not ask for clarification, did not look at things neutrally, did not assume the best, always assumed the worst, and always assumed it was from the perspective of, I'm unworthy, therefore people do things to make me feel unworthy, therefore, I never want to be around them again. And this friend, one of their friends hadn't been messaging as often, hadn't been coming out as often. And, that friend had started a new job. And when this person was complaining to me about it, that, oh, this friend is not messaging me. They used to always message me, but now they're not. And I don't care. I'm done with them. They're not reaching out. I was trying to give the perspective of, okay, but this person started a new job. Maybe they're really exhausted. It's a very exhaustive job. It's tiring. Maybe they're not feeling it. Maybe they just want time alone, which is also fair. Nobody owes you as much time as you want from them all the time, right? Maybe they need time alone. Maybe they're tired, whatever. But this person wasn't really having it, and they refused to ask that friend to clarify what's going on. And I think I kind of pushed this person to ask for that extra bit of information. And they did, and the friend answered, no, there's nothing wrong, whatever. But that person didn't take that answer didn't take it positively. They took it again with a negative intention of they're just lying, they're not being truthful. And yeah, that could be the case, but you could also choose to take it as at face value so that you feel better. So you're like, okay, you know what? This person told me this. If they meant something else by it, if they meant it negatively, I'll let them come tell me that. I won't assume it because it's not making me feel good. All it's doing is making me feel like I'm unwanted and unworthy. Why would I make myself feel that way? And so then that created a little bit of a rift, a fight, an argument between, it's like all of that could have just been solved sooner had you just asked sooner and then taken the answer at face value and just leaned into the positive assumption, And I think about that often, and I keep that in mind as well when I get into circumstances like that, because I do, I'm human. I have self-worth struggles as well. And that is usually what I lean into first, is a negative assumption. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share this topic because I think a lot of people struggle with this, and I think it could be useful to look at it this way. And also I I like providing specific tools for how to work through this that have helped me. Of course, this is all from my own experience. But for me, it's, asking, do I have all the information? Is this true? If it's not true, what's the alternative reason for this person saying this thing? And am I going to take that answer, or am I going to just lean into the positives? What would make me feel better? Does it make me feel better to think that this person meant this maliciously, or does it make me feel better to assume that this person is a kind person because I have them in my life? They're a friend of mine. They're my partner. I'm going to assume that they don't mean things maliciously, And if you assume that every person in your life means like something maliciously, if that's your instinct is to assume that it's malicious, then I would ask, why do you have these people in your life if you even believe that they're always saying things maliciously? Looking at it from that perspective too. And if you then realize like, okay, no, I actually don't think that they're bad people. So then again, it comes back to maybe this is my belief. Maybe I'm leaning into this negative assumption because of how I view myself and how I think others are viewing me, But yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope it offered a bit of perspective on the idea of assumptions and how assumptions are hurting your own feelings if you don't have all the information, which most of the time you don't, because again, we can't live inside anyone else's mind but our own. And so it's important that we make our minds a safe space for us. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll be back again next week with another one.